Hello, and welcome to this, our 50th live stream, where we take your questions on ancient Egypt and the Bible. Now, we have called this the Terminator Edition. You can probably understand the reason why. Now, I am not wearing these sunglasses just because I like the Terminator movies. Okay. The reason I'm wearing the sunglasses is because of one of the side effects of COVID. Okay, and it has left me with some lingering side effects. Two of the side effects I got is a nagging, lingering cough. Okay, the other issue is I have photosensitivity in the right eye that actually causes a lot of pain when I look at a computer screen. So, in order for me to continue doing any work at all on a computer, let alone with bright studio lights just glaring at me all at once here, I have to wear some sunglasses. And I've had to wear them all week. So, this is not going to be a permanent fashion statement, okay? This is not permanent. I'm hoping to ditch these things as soon as possible. However, for you sort of theological geeks out there, these are actually, I don't know if you can see the logo on the side here, sunglasses from the U.S. Air Force Chaplain Corps. Okay? So I received these from a U.S. Air Force chaplain. So, as a gift. So, you know, it's kind of cool, but it happened to be one of the only pairs of sunglasses I had that I could use with a computer monitor. I do have another pair of sunglasses, but it's polarized, so you can't see the monitors because monitors use a lot of polarized light. So, but this is one that I could use with my current let's just say Rona issues, and still actually do my day-to-day job. So anyway, the rules of tonight are the same as always. You know, super chats have priorities. If you want to ask a question that's not a super chat, and we do take non-super chat questions, we ask that you put a Q and a colon at the beginning of your question so I know it's directed to me, and only ask the question once, because I go through it and I scan the questions to see if I have previously answered them or not. Okay. Also, if it happens to be concern a Bible verse or a foreign word, please include where the verse, book, chapter, and verse number, so I can know where to find it, or what language that you think it is and what you think the word means, so that I have a little bit of context to go from. Okay? Okay. So that's the general outline of how this all works. We're going to take 3 non-super chats to begin with, and then we are going to get into the super chats, and then we'll probably end the night with a few more non-super chats again. So, unless we want to have super chats, in which case we go back to non-super chats. All right? So, with that said, let's get into our first question. And our first I will start again with 3 non-super chats. The first one is from Matthew Chanel, where he asks, what laws did the ancient Egyptians and Israelites have regarding the desecration of a grave? Were there similarities between them? Actually, no. As far as desecration of a grave goes, it's very different between Israelites and ancient Egyptians. In the case of the Israelites, people didn't desecrate graves because they were considered to be unclean. Okay, it was ritually taboo for a person to touch a corpse. If you touched a corpse or anything that touched a corpse, you'd have to go to the temple, go to the priest, and you'd have to present an offering and be ritually cleansed. Okay, and this was considered to be a very, very serious thing in Israelite culture, because if you were The thing with being unclean in ritual in Israelite culture is it was communicable. Okay, it was highly communicable. So if you are unclean, made ritually unclean, and you touch somebody else who's ritually clean, you transfer your uncleanness to that person. That's bad stuff. That's really bad stuff. So you could potentially contaminate an entire village. So people took that whole clean versus unclean thing very, very seriously. Second of all, the Israelites didn't mummify their bodies. So they tended to smell really, really bad, So people didn't generally go into a tomb until often a year later. And that's usually in later periods when they started collecting bones for ossuaries. The Israelites would put a body in a tomb, let it rot to the bone, and then collect the bones and put them in these ossuary boxes. And that was more late, definitely Second Temple period, 3rd to, say, 1st centuries AD, 3rd century BC to 1st centuries AD that they did this practice. Okay? Now, in the case of Egyptians, unlike, say, in Israel culture where a corpse was considered unclean, the Egyptian corpses were considered to be ritually purified. And they were holy, so they could be handled by priests. Okay? So there's a whole different sort of thing going on there. Now, in the case of Egypt, the big desecration problem was actually not desecrating a corpse as much as tomb robbing. Because there was a lot of goods for the afterlife, there was a lot of grave robbing in ancient Egypt. Okay? And while ancient Egypt had no laws against grave robbing, it was considered to be something you weren't supposed to do it. Okay? It was a naughty act. It was a naughty act. But there was no law against it. Now, some of the reason why there was no law against it was because Egyptians didn't have much of laws of any kind. It wasn't a society governed by laws. Now, in the case of ancient Israel, lots of laws. Lots of laws. Very legalistic society. Egypt wasn't that way. It was a society governed by good order. Okay? So you didn't have a lot of laws. Not in the books, anyway. But there was this tradition that people did respect. Unfortunately, robbing graves does not seem to be among that tradition that was often widespread accepted. So you did have people robbing graves for various reasons. Sometimes it was just for profit. In late Dynasty 21, late Dynasty 20 and Dynasty 21, it was to recycle the family coffins because there was a wood shortage. And because of that wood shortage, many people had to use their grandparents' coffins to bury the current dead. And that was sort of seen as an acceptable reason to rob a tomb. It's the family tomb, it's the family custody. You aren't doing it for disrespectful reasons, but to be respectful to the current dead. So there was more than one reason why a tomb might have been robbed, and it wasn't always for nefarious reasons. But the Egyptians didn't have any laws against it, and the laws that the Israelites had were more along the lines of, say, purity concerns. Now, with that said, however, if you got caught in Egypt robbing the tomb of, say, a high noble or of a king, yeah, there was definitely punishment. But that was because it defied the good order of the society. And usually it was a very, very severe punishment. And we actually do have a papyri from late Dynasty 20 where some tomb robbery investigations actually happen. and you got a few magi and some scribes that are going around to suspects. They're interrogating them. They're beating them up. Or I should say they're beating them up. Then they're interrogating them. And then they beat them up some more. But we don't actually know what happened to these people after the so-called inquiry made its final decisions. But you could probably suspect it was pretty severe. Okay. But there was no laws in the books. It was just a matter of tradition and respect for higher authority, really. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Great question. There wasn't a lot of similarity between them because they had different sort of religious concerns and legal concerns in the process. So, thanks for the question. Great question. Okay. Our next non-super chat question comes from Cam Britt, where he asks, was organized crime a thing in ancient Egypt and the ancient Near East? Yes and no. Okay. Ancient Near East, yes. There were organized bands of criminals in the ancient Near East. Ancient Egypt, not so much. Part of the reason is because there was in the ancient Near East, say in Mesopotamia, in Syria, there was much more freedom of movement than you had in ancient Egypt. In ancient Egypt, everyone was sort of sequestered in their own little private villages or in their provinces or in their towns. So there really wasn't a lot of movement between of peoples going around Egypt. So because of that, you didn't have as much organized crime. Now, there was disorganized crime. A lot of theft in Egypt. Still today, a lot of theft in Egypt. Egypt has always kind of been a kleptomaniac sort of society. So, you're not likely to get, like, beat up and robbed in Egypt. Neither today nor in the past. It was just not that sort of society ever. But they'll steal your purse if you put it down. So you watch your goods very closely, and it was always the case in Egypt. You know, theft was always been a problem in Egypt. But that wasn't organized crime. That was really sort of one-off, disorganized sort of ventures. Later on, for example, you know, at Deir el-Medina, you did have, say, the entire community participate in tomb robbery. But it wasn't organized in the sense that it had a real structure to it. So it wasn't like a mafia-esque sort of thing by any stretch of the imagination. Now, say in Mesopotamia and in Syria, you had a different sort of crime there. You did have crime leaders, you know, basically people who would organize gangs of thugs to rob travelers. Again, there was more movement in that society, so because there was more physical movement of people between towns, there was a lot more opportunity for robbery of that kind and organized crime to take place. So, it wasn't a thing in Egypt, really, but it was a thing in the ancient Near East. So, anyway, interesting question. Thank you very much for the question. Okay. And our third non-super chat comes from Jacob Testa. And he asks, "Hi, Dr. Falk. Hope you're doing well." Well, you can see by the eyeglasses how I'm doing, so... just a quick question. What is your stand on biblical inerrancy? Do you believe it or reject it? And is it even historical? And by historical, I mean before Luther. Yes, it is. It is something that we find before Luther. We do find traces of it throughout the Church Fathers. Now, my view on it is I do accept biblical inerrancy, but I also understand that it's a concept that has also changed quite a bit over the history of the Church. Now, what I have come to accept as inerrancy is that the statements of the Bible are accurate in what they affirm, in as far as what we find in the autographs. Okay? Now, there's a lot of caveats to that statement. Okay? The first is we don't have the autographs, but that's not as big a deal as it might sound, because we have enough text to, in many cases, figure out what the autographs would have said. So that's not exactly as big a problem as it might seem at first blush. The bigger problem is for biblical inerrancy is the whole idea of, what the Bible affirms is what is inerrant. Now, the issue here is this, and that issue is that if you have to figure out what the Bible affirms, you're actually doing an interpretation, and no interpretation is actually inerrant. So you're kind of in a little bit of a catch-22 here. But if the Bible is affirming it and is clear about it, then I'm more than happy to say, yeah, that's and it seems to come from the Autographa as opposed to a later variant. I'm more than happy saying that is inerrant. That is affirming a truth that is essentially without error, essentially. So I'm happy with that. Now, I'm also take a very nuanced approach to this too because of my hermeneutic. And my hermeneutic is basically saying whatever text you have, you read it in its context. That gives a whole broader range to biblical inerrancy than, say, for example, somebody who has a purely wooden literalistic reading. Because if you have a purely literalistic reading, then your range of what is possibly inerrant is a lot smaller. So, again, it's one of those things that I do affirm. I do affirm biblical inerrancy. But again, it's with those particular caveats. What does the Bible actually affirm? Is it part of the Autographa? Does it fit in with its historical context? And if it meets all that criteria, I have no problem with saying it's inerrant. But I'm also, as I'm saying that to him, I'm also cognizant of the fact that I might be misinterpreting it too. I have to put the human reader in this as well and basically say, as a human reader, I am subject to biases, I'm subject to misinterpretations, I'm subject to my own personal ignorance about a specific text. So, with that said, that's about the best answer I can give you on this. If you want to know more, there's also the Chicago Statement of Inerrancy that I think is probably the best modern statement on biblical inerrancy. And it was signed by people like D.A. Carson, J.I. Packer, Warwick Montgomery, Montgomery Warwick. There's a lot of people who signed that document. So, and I generally follow the Chicago Statement for the most part. So, anyway, thank you for that question. Interesting question. All right, now we're on to the Super Chats. And our first Super Chat of the night comes from Cambrit for $10. Thank you very much for the Super Chat. In Matthew 16:28 and 26:24, is it true that the word coming can mean moving or going? In a broad way, yes, it can. Is Christ referring to his ascension as opposed to his second coming? God bless. Okay. Now, here's where it gets tricky. Because it means the word in Matthew 16:28, and let's pull that up. Okay, 16, and we'll go to verse 28 here. All right, and it says, "Truly I say to you, there are some of those who are standing here today who shall not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." Okay. Now, the word coming here is erkomai. It's erkomai. And it does mean to come. It also means, but it's specifically, it means to move from one point to another with focus on approach from the narrator's perspective. So you kind of almost have to put yourself in the narrator's shoes and basically say, what is the narrator trying to, what type of emotion that can the narrator be experiencing where it approaches him? This is why it generally has the meaning to come. But it can also mean to arrive. It can also mean a lot of other things too. It can even mean go in certain respects. For example, if the narrator is far away and somebody is leaving you to go to him, you're getting his perspective from a distance, which means it can mean to go. Okay? So it can mean to go. This is where things such as context and the precise precision of the Greek grammar here is really, really important. So, in the case of, say, for example, verse 1628 here, okay? Now, this can often be interpreted to mean the resurrection, where his kingdom is inaugurated. Now, there's two kinds of eschatology here at play here. What's sometimes called inaugural eschatology versus final eschatology. So, for example, in the case of 1628, this is often seen as an example of inaugural eschatology, where Christ is inaugurating his kingdom. So, some shall not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Okay? So, there's a whole lot of things here that, could be, happening here. But, and exegetes are at odds on this passage. So, this is not a cut and dry passage. And it's still very much debated. Some people think that, this was meant that everyone alive, some people have basically said, oh, this is Christ basically saying, there'll be at least one person living today who will live to see the second coming. And I really doubt that that's what's meant here. Okay, I do have, but it is also true that people in the second century, many of them, first and second centuries, did interpret it this way. Okay, people did interpret it this way, but I don't think this is what Christ meant here. Okay, so I do think it does in this case does mean his ascension, his show of his power over, say, eternal forces. So yes, it is the inauguration of his kingdom, where he ascends to heaven, and the Holy Spirit then comes to begin the work of the building of the kingdom of Christ. Okay, now 26:24. Get my mouse control back here. Okay, 26 to 24. The Son of Man, and the verse says, the Son of Man is to go just as it was written of him. But woe to man, that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been good for that man if he had not been born. Okay. Now, this one here is talking about the crucifixion. But it's not erkomai. Okay? It's actually hapago, which is, I think it's hapago. Let's see. Yeah, hapago. Which is to depart, so in this case, to go out. So this is not erkomai. This is different. So in this particular case, he's basically saying that, the Son of Man is going to leave you. He's not going to be with you always. So this might also refer to the ascension as well, in a more different way. But in the context here, it is specifically talking about the crucifixion. Basically, the betrayal and crucifixion by Judas. Okay? So, these are two different words with two different sort of linguistic ranges. You know, this one here, hypago, means to go out, depart, leave, whereas erkomai is more along the lines of a moving transition from one point to another with the perspective of the narrator in mind. Okay? So, anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, our second super chat is from Cataphracт3 for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. What's going on in Genesis 9:20-27? What did Ham actually do? If you can't answer that in a YouTube-friendly way, I put it another question below instead. Okay. We're going to try to answer this in a family-friendly way. Okay. And we will pull this up. All right. I'm going to read the passage first. Then Noah began farming and planted a vineyard. This is after the flood, after the ark settles at Ararat, and all the animals are released. Verse 21, continuing. And he drank of the wine and became drunk and uncovered himself inside his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Jacob took a guard and laid it on both their shoulders and walked backwards and covered the nakedness of their father, and their faces were turned away so that they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah woke from his wine, he knew the youngest son had done to him. And scroll that down some more. And so he said, "Cursed is Canaan, servant of servants, he shall be to his brothers." And he also said, "Blessed be the Lord God of Shem, let Canaan be his servant." Okay. How do I say this in a very family-friendly way? Uncovering your father's nakedness is a euphemism. It's an Israelite euphemism for sleeping with your father's wife. Yeah. That's the nice way of putting it. What Ham actually did was he slept with his father's wife while his father was drunk. Okay? And he's proud of the deed. He's proud of this. He basically tells Shem and Japheth this. So that's what's going on here. Now, that's the nasty deed, and it comes out of a culture where not only is say incest forbidden, but any semblance of possible incestuous like relationships because of their disorder to a antithetical society. Israelite culture was an antithetical society. They saw black and white in everything. You don't mix plant fibers with animal fibers because that's a mixing of kinds. Incest, where it's really not a blood incest, but it's a family tie incest, is also a crossover of kinds. So this is very verboten in Israelite culture. Okay? So that's what Ham did here. is he had sex with Noah's wife. We're not sure if that was his mother or not. The text does not say. Still pretty gross. It's pretty gross. And that's why he's cursed. And that's why his offspring are cursed. Now, we're not even told whose offspring Canaan actually is either. There's that possibility too. That Canaan is cursed because he's actually the offspring of Ham and Noah's wife. So, and again, here's something where the text remains somewhat silent. We don't know if Noah's wife is the same woman that bore the 3 children, bore one of the children, or is a brand new wife. We have no idea. Text doesn't say. All we know from the text is that this is what happened. This is the uncovering of Noah's nakedness. Okay? It's not actually seeing Noah naked. It's actually, as I said, having marital relationships with your father's wife. That's what it is. Okay? So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, now we're on to the Twitchit. Okay, and we got here. Okay, and see Kenny Rhodes here. Question, wilt thou need as an amanuensis to communicate your thoughts from tonight's joust with the peasants? There are no peasants on this channel. Everyone who comes on our live stream is royalty. So I probably won't be needing a scribe. But thank you for the offer. I did like your interpretations, by the way, of the last popcorn review. You did pull out a little bit of emotional exegesis out of that I did not basically speak out loud. So, it's good to see you here tonight, though. Okay. Our next super chat is from Cole Walker for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hey, Dr. Falk and Ostraca, 1250 BC, recording work absences has an entry that says month 1 of spring, day 14, drinking with Khonsu. Is this an expression regarding a festival or something similar? Yes, it is. It's a festival. And there was actually many of these festivals. So, and we do find in day rolls from Deir el-Medina festivals like this being mentioned. So, including these day rolls kept track of the work that was happening at Deir el-Medina, and they also kept track of worker absences and the reason why they were absent. Sometimes a piece of roof fell on them and they had to take a day off to recover because their arm was split open. Good of them to give them a half day off to recover from a split open arm, but yeah, there you have it. But they would also be allowed certain times off to go celebrate festivals. And some of these festivals were drinking festivals where you would get sloshed. It happened. The 5 epigomenal days were like this. They were drinking festivals as well as essentially religious festivals. The great festival of Bastet was a drinking festival where people would get not just sloshed drunk, but absolutely hammered. Part of the reason they were hammered, too, is because oftentimes wine was mixed with lotus flowers to give the wine a narcotic effect. Okay? So they didn't just get toasty, they got hammered. So yes, this is Drinking with Khonsu is essentially an allusion to a drinking festival for the moon god Khonsu. Okay? So, that's what the reference is to. Now, we don't know the exact festival. We don't have the festival calendar for every temple. Wish we did. That would make things very, very much clearer than they actually are. We got a few festival calendars. For example, we got the festival calendar at Abydos from the temple of Abydos Temple of Seti I. Okay, but we don't have the festival temples for every temple, unfortunately, and amazingly, not even some of the big temples like Luxor or Karnak. So we do that there are these drinking festivals. They didn't just get hammered. They didn't just get drunk. They got hammered, and it was part of their religious duty to get really, really drunk. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and I hope that answered your question. Okay, our next super chat is from Lou for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Good to see you here tonight. Did Egyptians use sunscreens, being the fact that they live in a hot climate? That is a very, very interesting question, because generally the answer is no. Now, with that said, however, they did use cosmetics to reduce glare from the sun. Okay. Now, this is one of the real interesting aspects. Your typical Egyptian didn't wear sunscreens. Now, it's possible some of them might have coated themselves in like ochre. That's a possibility. Although we don't really have good evidence for that. But we do have evidence that both men and women wore eye paint. And they wore eye paint for the same reason that football players often put smears of black makeup underneath their eye, which is to prevent sun glare. Okay? So, and this is something that's really, really interesting. You know, both men and women wore cosmetics, and both wore perfume. We find perfume in the tombs of both men and women in ancient Egypt. So it isn't something that was exclusive to women. Both men and women wore cosmetics and perfume. So this is something that's really, really interesting. I was at a conference once with Dora Goldsmith. Now, she's a PhD student right now whose specialization is on fragrances. And you know, I've had some interaction with her in the past. I've given her some tips on all that. But you know, I was sitting beside her at a conference paper, and there's a conference paper given by a couple of students who you know, tried to make the suggestion that, you know, that they found these cosmetics in a tomb, so it had to be a female occupant because of these sex differences, and between, you know, men and women, you know, men don't wear makeup or cosmetics on, women do. And she just you know, stood up right in the middle of this conference, and she goes, "What are you talking about? We find these in all sorts of tombs. You know, perfume, cosmetics are used by both men and women." And she goes on for like about 5 minutes, and I'm just snickering, and she sits down and she goes, "What?" I said, "You completely gutted their paper. They have nowhere to go because they hadn't." And she goes, "Did I do something wrong?" I said, No, absolutely, you did the right thing. They didn't do their research. They got up at a conference with a half-researched paper, and this is what happens. And, you know, but it's very true that in ancient Egypt, both men and women wore cosmetics, both wear perfume. We just don't know if they wore sunscreen. So that's kind of a don't know. But they also didn't also work in the heat of the day either. They would tend to rest during the heat of the day, and tend to work more in the mornings and the evenings when it was sort of less hostile. Okay, so they did account for some of this. They did take measures against the glaring heat. And they also didn't tend to work during the height of summer either. Okay, so there's that as well. They just didn't do agricultural work in the height of summer. It was just too hot, even in the morning. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that answered your question, and very much appreciated. Okay. Camel Leopard for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Shabbat Shalom, Dr. Falk. My question was too expensive for this box. Creating squinting face find below. All right. Sure thing. Yeah, I know they charge you more money for more characters, but all right. Here's the super chat. How would you identify the taninim hagadolim of Genesis 1:21? Okay, taninim, the great dragon, as it were, of Genesis. Great dragons, sorry, the great serpents of Genesis 1:21. I've seen suggestions that they were dragons, whales, even dinosaurs. Okay, I don't think they're dinosaurs. Okay, just plain old simply, I don't think they're dinosaurs. I don't think they're whales either. Okay. Actually, let's pull up the passage. We'll just do the quick read of the passage. Genesis 1, and go to 20. Good enough. All right. Now, a lot of, like, for example, this is the New American Standard Version, and it renders it the great sea monsters. And God created the great sea monsters, and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swam after their kind, and every winged bird after its kind, and God saw that it was good. Okay. Now, we do find the term tananim in Ugaritic literature. Okay. We do find it in other ancient Near Eastern literature. Okay. It does seem to have a mythological component. Okay. So it does seem to be a reference to, say, the mythological, say, monsters of the deep, like the Yom, the sea, the great sea monster. Okay, would be one of these tananim hagadolim. Okay, so. I don't, as I say, I don't think it's dinosaurs. I'm sorry, American Young Earth creationists. I don't think they're dinosaurs. I don't think they're dragons either, because, well, dragons tend to be land-dwelling creatures for the most part, and they're not whales, because frankly, to an ancient Israelite, a whale's a fish, not a mammal, and not a tananim. So I think what it's talking about here is something much deeper religiously, which is that these are, say, the great monsters of ancient Near Eastern myth, like Leviathan, like Behemoth, like the Yom, like the Moat, the great monster of death. These are what Israelites thought dwelled in the deepest, darkest bottoms of the ocean. Okay? So, that's what I think the Tananim Hagadolim actually is. And Tananim, as I said, being monster serpent. Hagadolim meaning the great ones. Okay? So, that's my opinion here. Thank you very much for the super chat, and I hope that answered your question. Okay. Our next one is from Jared Gilmore for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Bovine worship was very common in the ancient Near East. Egypt, Minos, even Gobekli Tepe has bold depictions. What common elements are seen these cults, and why are they ubiquitous over so much time? Well, it is absolutely true that bovine worship is everywhere in the ancient Near East. Absolutely everywhere. It's ubiquitous. It's the par excellence worship of ancient Egypt. We find it in Ashkelon with the silver bulls. We find it in Syria where there's altars with bull-shaped heads. It goes all the way into Mesopotamia. It goes into Turkey. It's everywhere. It's absolutely ubiquitous. Why it's so ubiquitous seems to boil down to the fact that cows were very, very important to agrarian life, essentially. Cows are not just good for milk. They're not just good for meat. They also condition the soil. Cows are one of those animals that is among the least polluting for waterways. This is why almost every culture that has, say, concerns over, say, water purity will almost always prefer domesticated cattle over, say, sheep, goats, or, help them, swine. Nothing pollutes a waterway faster than a pig farm. Okay? So where the necessities of life are being carried by your water supply, you need basically a clean way to revitalize your soil, to till the ground in such a way that you don't end up polluting the very streams that are providing your crops with life. Okay? And for almost every culture, the choice of that was cows. You know, we now have concerns today over, say, methane, cows as greenhouse, polluting animals, which, by the way, most of the methane from a cow does not come out of the back end, but out of the front end through its rumination. Okay? So basically, when a cow eats grass, it goes into one stomach where it gets processed. It's there where all the manufacture of methane happens, and it comes out of the mouth. What comes out of, say, the back end of cows is actually really, really good fertilizer and is very environmentally friendly. So, there's that aspect to it. So, and frankly, it's one of those things that, cows are, on a pound per pound basis, they're about 50% less polluting than sheep. So it's not even, it's a substantial margin. It's a substantial margin where these are much more cleaner animals for, say, ancient agricultural purposes. So this is why they're so important all over the ancient Near East. They till the soil. You can hitch a plow to them and plow with them. You can take them and you can make meat and cheese and milk products. There's sort of a one-stop.
And then there's the leather.
And then there's the leather too. Cows make fabulous wet leather. They're very, very useful animals. They're incredibly useful animals. Yeah, so it's no surprise that we still see cows still worshipped as divine beings in India today, amongst Hindus. Okay, so and that's the reason, is because of these agricultural societies, especially when populations start getting a lot tighter and there's a lot more necessity for those animals to be cleaner. So anyway, they were essentially miracle animals. They were miracle animals, and that's why they were venerated as being almost divine. So anyway, Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And it's an interesting question, too. Okay. We have one here from Tony G for $19.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Your latest popcorn video was timely. I just visited the Creation Museum and Noah's Ark in Kentucky with a heavy dose of young Earth creationism. How do I respond to those who call one a heretic for doubting a 6,000-year-old Earth? Okay. My opinion on origins is this. It's not something we should ever divide over. It has never been considered a essential of the Christian faith. You can go through the entire history of the Christian church. It's never been considered an essential. Okay? Christian theologians have debated this over the millennia. Okay? It's never been considered to be an essential. Now, you'll get people, like the Westminster Confession, will talk about that heaven and earth were created in 6 days. Where it's more or less parroting the text from Genesis 1. Okay? But there's also been people, even in that camp, say those of the Reformed tradition, who really, really sort of doubted, was it 6 days or was it one? I mean, a lot of this was just in the case of, during the Reformation times, the big creation debate was whether creation happened in 6 days or 1 day. And there was a large contingent of people that basically said that creation happened in 1 day. God just made it in a single day. So there were people even during the Reformation who held that the 6 days were, say, more figurative. Okay? Holding essentially that God was so powerful he didn't need 6 days. So he did it in one. Okay? So you're always going to have that argument going on in the background. In Greek times, there were people who believed that the earth was 125,000 years. And some people in the church did adopt that Greek view. So, the whole matter of it being an essential is not something you find in the history of the Christian church. Now, when you talk about heresy, what you're talking about here is something really specific. It's really specific. It has to do with your salvation. Either you deny salvation by grace through faith, or you believe in works salvation, or you have some belief that puts you on the wrong track to salvation. That's considered heretical. Or it has to do with the identity of God. Like, for example, is God, not three persons but one God who switches modes, i.e. modalism. That's considered a heresy because you're worshiping the wrong God. That's sort of the narrow lane in which you find heresy. And it's not just error. It's error that ultimately affects your salvation or affects the salvation of others. Because it either gives you the wrong identity of God, in which case you're worshiping the wrong God, or it's the wrong means of salvation. In other words, even if you are worshiping the right God, your view of salvation is wrong, so you are depending on the wrong thing for salvation. Okay? Moreover, you have to be almost warned of this for it to be heresy, because, there were people in the past that held views that were, say, not, what we would call orthodox. But they also weren't warned. In those cases, they are limited by their knowledge. So, because they're limited by their knowledge, they're not as accountable as those who are then corrected later on and basically told, hey, your error here is going to lead you to a certain destruction. So in that case, because they're intransigent, that becomes heretical at that point. So that's where sort of you go from, say, being just in error to being heretical. Now, in the case of American young earth creationism, which is what the view at the Creation Museum represents, they are trying to make the case that it is heretical, that you can lose your salvation over this. I would vigorously dispute that. I think this is something that really, as long as you think that God created the heavens and the earth, it doesn't matter how old you think it is. It's not a matter. It's a matter of personal conscience. It's a matter of, say, you could be right, you could be wrong. But just because you don't hold that view doesn't mean you're heretical. And it's certainly because no church has basically maintained this, that the earth is 6,000 years old. It's really very dubious. It's really very dubious. So, I mean, that's how I would respond to them. I'd basically say, hey, this is something that's outside the Christian definition of orthodoxy. It is outside the Christian definition of orthodoxy. This is a doctrine of man that's being added onto the gospel, but it is not the gospel itself. So if we want to leave with just one sort of soundbite, it'd be that. This is a doctrine of man that has been added alongside the gospel, but isn't the gospel itself. And therefore, it cannot be heresy. So anyway, I want to thank you very much for that super chat. I hope that helped. I very much appreciate it. Okay. The Camel Leopard, again, for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. With the Greek names of Jesus and Joshua both being Iesous, okay, why are both not called Jesus in English? Okay. It's not called, both in, for example, like, Joshua is Iesu, which is the Greek form of Yahushua. Okay, for example, in English, we have both, say, the Joshua, which is an English translation of the Hebrew Yehoshua. And then we got the second one, which is basically a translation of a translation, which Jesus is. Jesus is Yehoshua, which is translated into Iesu, which then comes into Latin as Iesous. Okay? So we have both in English, and that's because we're translating them the same name in two different ways. So that's why we find both in English, is because English is very idiosyncratic. It doesn't do things consistently. There's no reason they couldn't have both been either translated as Joshua or as Jesus. Either one could have happened, but because of the historical anomaly, which is English, we have both. And we do it often you often use both to try to draw that distinction between, say, Jesus Christ versus any of the other Iesu or Joshua's running around. Okay? So that's more of a translational choice that we often exercise in English. But there's no reason it couldn't be either one. Really. Practically every Greek scholar / seminarian knows that Iesus comes from Joshua. I mean, it's just, we find, for example, in the writings of what's his name now? Josephus. He makes references to, I think, 23 or 24 Iesus. They're all different people, but they're all Joshuas of some kind. So It's more than just a matter of how are we translating it in English. So unfortunately, English is full of translational idiosyncrasies. We have traditional translations and traditional renderings in in English that just sometimes make your head scratch. But what can I say? English is weird. It's just plain weird. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. Okay. We got a super chat here from Matthew Harrell for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat.
Makes a joke about your glasses, which I says twice.
Oh. Hi, Dr. Falk. Nice shades. I see you're better. Well, not completely, which is why we're wearing the shades. Anyway, did Moses think he could gain power over God by knowing his secret name when God first revealed his name in the burning bush? Wow, that is a fascinating question. That's really hard to say. It certainly would have been. It wouldn't have been out of the ordinary for somebody from Egypt to think that. Okay, that would have definitely been something that somebody in Egypt would have thought. But I think Moses gets the idea pretty fast that God's sovereign here. That you do get very much the impression that Moses is the servant of God, not God the servant of Moses. And with a lot of, say, using a true person's name, a true God's name to manipulate the divine, you do see that characteristic in, say, Egyptian magic, where the true name is being used to manipulate a god to get an end, so that the god is serving you. But you don't seem to find that in Moses. Moses doesn't seem to fall under that. Now, we don't know why. He was raised in Egypt. He would have been aware of this, definitely. In fact, it very much does seem that, say, that it's in the Ten Commandments that, you shall not take the Lord thy God's name in vain. It's not just misusing the name of God, but misrepresenting God, also manipulating God in a magical sense, like you do find in Egypt. So the writer of the Ten Commandments was very much aware of this. Seems to be very aware of this use of the true name of God. But I do seem to get the impression that Moses is overwhelmed by his experience with God, not in a relationship here where he's trying to manipulate God. So I don't think we see this in Moses' narrative, but if it had been anyone else, who knows? Could have been. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Very interesting question too. Insightful question on top of it. All right. Another one from the Camel Leopard for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. What is the best way to translate Genesis 1:1? In the beginning, God created, or when God began to create? Okay. Let's pull up Genesis 1:1 here. Genesis 1:1. I'm going to pull it up actually in the Hebrew here. Oops, if I can scroll it without. There we go. All right. Okay. Genesis 1:1. Bereshit. In the beginning. Bara Elohim et hashemayim va'et ha'eretz. Okay? Now, I understand why some people try to use the when God began to create. It does seem a little strange given the grammar and the syntax here. The idea of this being, say, a clause, a single, a subordinate clause prior to the verse 2, I think is somewhat dubious here. Yeah, we got here, for example, verse 2, the beginning of this verse 2 starts with evolve, but it's not evolve consecutive. It's a evolve conjunction. Okay? So, we don't get sort of the sense that, for example, that verse 2 has to immediately follow chronologically from verse 1. So, and yet, verse 1 is a complete sentence in Hebrew. It is a complete sentence in Hebrew. We do have, for example, in the beginning. That is literally what the very first word says. Bara created, Elohim, God created, and then you got the direct object marker 8. Hashemayim, the heavens, va'et, again the conjunction and the direct object marker again, ha'eretz, the earth. Okay, so I tend to lean towards the in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Okay, I think that's the best, most intuitive translation of this passage. I think if you start using it as a subordinate clause, I think that you're on some shaky linguistic grounds here. And I don't think the structure of the passage can really support it. Now, you can still achieve, for example, one of the reasons why some translators prefer the when God began to create is to try to show that Genesis 1:1 is not an act, but it is a title of the that marks the beginning of the book. And I think you can still interpret it without resorting to a subordinate clause. In many respects, it's almost clear if you do it without turning it into a subordinate clause. But that's the reason why many translators will translate it this way, is because they want to maintain that titular aspect of Genesis 1:1 without it being, say, part of the acts of God per se. And given that we don't have a consecutive vav in verse 1-2, that again is warrant that what we have here is sort of a kind of a break, a small mini break in that narrative there, where verse 1-2 does not necessarily have to follow after verse 1:1, which we would get if it were a title. There's also the fact too. There's also another grammatical feature of verse 1-2 as well, which is there's a change in syntax. And this is a really, really interesting feature of verse 1-2. So we're going to throw in verse 1-2, where he says, "Vahayeretz hiatia tohu vabohu vahoshek el panei tahum rakia." I don't have, these are not prescription glasses, so I'm squinting as I'm reading. Elohim Merkapet el Panei Hamayim. All right. Now, in verse 2, what we have here is a change in like, for example, in Hebrew, the syntax often starts with the verb. Verb, subject, object is the normal syntax in Hebrew. Now, we do notice here that in Genesis 1:1, we don't have that syntax. We have that Bereshit in the beginning, but that's sort of an introductory, prepositional phrase. Then it begins with the verb, and then the subject, and then the object. So it's a normal verb syntax here. It's a normal sort of verb, subject, object syntax in verse 1:1. But verse 2 isn't like that. It begins with the subject, ha'eretz, the earth, was basically formless and void. Okay. Now this is really interesting. This is really, really interesting because we have subject, verb, object as the structure of verse 2. We find this pattern occur when there's a change in subject, when there's supposed to be a break. Hebrew writers will often use a change in syntactical order to show that there's a break between its previous content and what its current thought. So that, combined with the conjunction, the va of conjunction, does kind of show us that verse 1 is a title, and it is separate from verse 2. So while I do empathize with the reason for having that when God began to create, I think it might have something of a similar meaning, but I prefer the reading of in the beginning God created. It's a more straightforward reading. And basically I prefer to have a more straightforward reading, a clearer reading, and then use exegesis to bring out that meaning, rather than try to cram it all into something that could be easily misinterpreted. Because you're then, by using that second translation, you're basically in some ways rubbing out that hard break by putting in a subordinate clause instead. So, anyway, that's my opinion on this. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. Okay, Matthew Harrell again for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Is the tale of Sinuhe connected with the story of Joseph? I've seen they seem similar in some way. Is this just coincidence? Yes, it is. But it is sort of reflective of a period that happens just before Joseph. Now, this happens during the 12th dynasty. Okay? So Sinuhe is, we do know that it happens during the reign of, I think it is, Senwosret, it's either the second or the third. I can't remember which one it is off the top of my head. I'd have to look it up. But the king is assassinated. Sinuhe is one of the bodyguards of the king, and he thinks, oh no, I'm the bodyguard of the king. King's been assassinated. I've got to get out of town before this new successor comes and starts looking for blood as to why the bodyguards didn't do their job. So Sinuhe hightails it out of Egypt, and he eventually spends several decades in Palestine, in the Levant. It's really very opposite to Joseph in that respect, in which it's Sinuhe is leaving Egypt. He's spending time in the Levant, and then essentially he gets a letter saying, "Hey, we missed you. Come on home." Okay, all's forgiven. Come on home, because they hear back in the Egyptian royal court about this weird Egyptian living out in the Levant. Well, who could this be? It's got to be Sinuhe. Now, what I think is very interesting about the tale of Sinuhe. And I do not represent the majority opinion here, okay? Honestly. Most Egyptologists think that Sinuhe is a piece of fiction. But I've got my doubts. One of the reasons I really doubt that Sinuhe is a piece of fiction is it because it reads very much like a tomb biography. It wouldn't surprise me if at some point we find a Middle Kingdom tomb of an official that happened to be named Sinuhe and happened to be remarkably similar to this particular story. It's got all the earmarks. It's got all the earmarks of a tomb biography. From basically, his early life, his accomplishments, his as bodyguard of the king, his escape path out and his interaction with the savages of the outside world. Comes back, is honored by the king, is given a lavish burial where he's put on a bier that's pulled by 2 oxen, which is very old kingdom style of burial, very classy in the Middle Kingdom. So, there's just a lot of things there that is just entirely reminiscent of Middle Kingdom literature. Now, on the other hand, Joseph is not. His story tends to have more of a context that seems to be more in line with the Second Intermediate Period, which is after the Middle Kingdom. So, for me, when I look at, say, the tale of Sinuhe and I try to compare it to Joseph, I don't see a lot of comparisons there. Other than you got a bunch of Semitic peoples running around. That's about all the major points of comparison. Okay? I don't think the story of Joseph comes from Sinuhe. I do think, however, that Sinuhe was a real person, probably had a real tomb, and I think that Joseph comes about, say, 200 years later. So that's my opinion on it, and thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. Okay, Matthew Harrell for $19. Thank you very much for the super chat. He says, "I'm so sorry for the shades joke." All is forgiven. Yeah, the shades do look ridiculous. Okay, I get it. The shades look dumb, but
People think you look cool.
Well, some people think it's cool too. When I wore these at work, I came in with a new pair of jeans and a leather jacket, and people were going, "It's the Terminator." And I said, "Yeah, very short Terminator." It's the only thing right now that's preventing the glare from the studio lights and the screens from creating my eyes screaming in pain. So, yeah, they look silly. I already admit they look silly. So.
Gilmore says when Dr. Falk signs off tonight, he's got to say, "I'll be back."
Okay, hold me to that. All right. I generally thought you were just being silly. No, doing it for medical reasons. I showed up late to the stream, and I'm also very tired. Please forgive me. Nothing here to forgive, friend. This is. There's nothing here to forgive. Yeah, even I admit it looks silly. So,
Like everything we try and have fun.
But we try to have fun. We try to have fun. And we try to laugh at ourselves too. We don't try to take ourselves too seriously. We take the work seriously. I mean, we take the research and the Bible deadly seriously. Okay, so we're very serious about the work. We're not serious about ourselves. Well, this is why I don't mind making silly animal noises on a popcorn review or pull out a sock puppet. Is because you gotta laugh at yourself. It's healthy to be able to laugh at yourself. So I do appreciate the super chat. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. But there was nothing here to forgive. You know, it's absolutely totally cool. We're absolutely fine. So, all right. Okay, Angel VW or WVM for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Good to see you here tonight. What are your views on the persons of Adam and Eve? Okay. I believe that Adam and Eve were historical people. Okay. Now, I also think too that there were also archetypes. And by archetypes, I mean because they were the first people, they are the archetypical first people. Okay? And an archetype is kind of a way of taking a real person and kind of adding a mythological element to them. Okay? What's sometimes called mythohistory. So, now, with that said, I also think that Adam himself was the progenitor of a clan. I don't think he lived that entire lifespan by himself, but that his name lived on through his successors until the next clan started. Okay? So, I do think Adam was a real person. I think Eve was a real person. I don't think they were that long-lived. I think the lifespan that's ascribed to Adam is the lifespan of his clan. And that's how basically ancient Israelites would have viewed this, tried to view someone as living that long as having been alive in memory, as it were, as long as that clan or family unit remained intact. So that's sort of my view on Adam and Eve. I don't have any other views really beyond that. As far as I do think that they were the cause of original sin. Okay, I think they really were in a garden that God considered to be His holy place, which we call Eden. I think there was a fruit. I think it was forbidden, and I think they ate it. And then I think bad stuff happened. Very, very bad stuff happened. So that's my view on Adam and Eve. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, we got a super chat here from Kenneth Bond for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. What kind of governments in Canaan did Israel go against? Jericho, the kings in southern cities under one empire or nation, separate states. Okay. When Israel comes into Canaan, probably our best view of what these governments look like comes actually from the Amarna letters, which happens about 200 years before the conquest, the Israelite conquest. Now, in the Amarna letters, what we see is that these little cities were essentially reduced from sizable landholdings to essentially city-states. The area had become rapidly depopulated. It had been depopulated so that these city-states couldn't really defend any more than their own walls, and sometimes not even that effectively. So what you have is the populations of in Canaan were all these little cities, each with its own king, and they're squabbling amongst each other. They're fighting each other. Even during the supposed, quote, Egyptian Empire, it's really, the Egyptians didn't really get involved with the politics between various cities. They let them fight it out. Okay? So there wasn't one unified, cohesive empire. Not in Canaan. What it was these separated city-states that hated each other's guts, took every opportunity to try to kill each other they could, and they're just battling it out, or just sort of clinging onto the walls, hoping they don't fall down by the time help arrives. They weren't. I mean, some of these cities, had only a couple hundred people. They were small, really, really small. These aren't sprawling cities like even like Vancouver or Seattle or Rome even was huge in comparison to these cities. These cities were tiny, really, really tiny, and that's because the whole area had gone over a process of depopulation that really started in the Middle Bronze Age, and just took its toll on the lives there. The agriculture there could not sustain, at least during the Middle Bronze and into, say, late Bronze Age 1 and 2A, just could not sustain the populations. So, and that's what ultimately made the cities in Canaan vulnerable to attack, and not just from the Israelites, but also from the Philistines, was the fact that the depopulation in the local area was such that they just couldn't maintain their numbers. So they are kings of the little city, but yeah, they are kings, or at least chiefs. Egyptians tend to call them more chiefs, but they call themselves kings. So that's sort of the kind of government that you had there. Is basically one-man rulership of a particular city. In the case of a successful holding, like for example Hatzor, where the king might conquer 5 cities and he had control of a sizable holdings. They will also have their seat of power in one city, and then have their influence to many others. Okay. So anyway, I hope that answered your super chat. Thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciated. Okay, we have a question from Cam Britt for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Quick follow-up question. So it is safe to say that Mark 14:26 is also about the ascension? Yes, absolutely. Praying for your COVID. Thank you. I could use all the prayers for this. As I say, I got that lingering cough that's just not going away. And now I got this eyesight thing too that's also been, really annoying. So do appreciate and do very much covet your prayers. And yes, indeed, Mark 14:62 is also talking about the ascension as well. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Really appreciate it, and really appreciate your support. Okay, and Matthew Harrell for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Last question for the night. Okay. Well, I very much appreciate all you've done tonight. So it's fantastic you've asked as many questions as you have. I read that ladders were used in some art for Osiris. Is this true? Jacob's ladder connection. I hope you get better. Thank you. God bless. God bless you also, and very much appreciate this. Now, the Egyptians did have ladders. They did have ladders, and they used ladders to decorate the walls of temples, tombs, etc. So yeah, they did actually have ladders. I'm not sure what you quite mean here for ladders were used in some art for Osiris. But we do know that they did have ladders. That they had means of getting up into high places by means of ladders. So, yes, the Egyptians had ladders. Was a thing. Whether or not it's used in the art, I'm not sure exactly what you mean here. So, but absolutely they were able to reach, to decorate high up on the walls, so maybe, sometimes up to like 15, 16 feet using ladders. We actually there's one tomb that was recently excavated in in Abu Ghraib, which is on the outskirts of Thebes, very close to the tomb of Mentuhotep the fourth, I believe. And at that tomb, it was basically, there was a tomb built upon the top of another tomb. But the way the second tomb was built was in such a way that there was actually no way you could reach the top. The bottom tomb was built first, and then sort of the roof cut away, and on top of that was built in this sort of step pattern a second tomb. And the wall of that second tomb was completely decorated all the way across. Well, that couldn't have been done with that first tomb, with the roof still there. It had to be carved out first. So what the excavators think happened was that they carved out that second tomb on top of the first one, and then used ladders to decorate the walls. So to get that extra height they needed. And we do find some very, very tall walls inside of some Egyptian tombs. Like, for example, you go to the tomb of Rekhmire, which is TT100, and it's like 30 feet up. You crick your neck looking up at the ceiling on that, and yet it's decorated all the way to the roof. Well, they probably use ladders to get up that high. So, I hope that's what you meant. If it isn't, restate your question and we'll look at it again. But anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Just before I saw a comment here by Faye of the Duat. Good to see you tonight. It's follow-up here. Could it be referring to the Djed Pillar? Possibly. There is some possibility that the Djed Pillar might have been a kind of ladder. That is possible. If it's sort of like supposedly the spine of Osiris, which in Egyptian myth was the Djed Pillar, it is possible that was a kind of ladder, although Egyptologists are not sure. We do know they use ladders, but we don't actually have many of them extant, to be honest. It's not like sledges. We actually have a lot of sledges from ancient Egypt, but we don't have very many ladders. But we know they had to have used them. So it is possible that the Djed Pillar, could have been a ladder. Could have been. It's possible. In which case they're just seeing then Osiris as having the spine, which is the equivalent of analogically uses a ladder as, say, Osiris' spine. So it's definitely a possibility. Can't say exactly for sure, but it's possible. Let's try to find out where I was left off here. Okay, Camel Leopard for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Do you think the Greek myth of Io relates to Hathor? Being turned into a cow, running to Egypt, being worshipped as a goddess. I don't know much about the Greek myth of Io. Here's one of my sort of when I was in college, I did some Greek literature, but I was never really got into Greek myth all that much. So I don't know Greek myth enough to really answer that. It's possible. Some Greek myth does seem to have connections to Egypt. So it wouldn't it wouldn't exactly surprise me. So I can't say for sure though, because I don't know either Greek myth or the history of Greek myth well enough to say one way or the other. So I'm gonna have to plead ignorance on this one, because Greek myth is just not my specialty. It's just not my specialty. And frankly, in many respects, how do I put this? It's kind of post-interesting. Greek and Roman stuff is not all that interesting to me, so I don't tend to read a lot of it. So as such, I'm not really all that well versed in Greek and Roman myths. So, sorry, I can't give you a better answer on that, but I do appreciate the super chat. Thank you very, very much, and it's a good question. I just don't know the answer. Okay. N.A. Odessa for $10 New Zealand. Thank you very much for the super chat. Glad to see someone here from New Zealand tonight. Fantastic. Wonderful. Maybe a bit off topic, but thoughts on the idea that Daniel was a 165 BC forgery. The issue that doesn't square with history is the seemingly failed prophecy of Antiochus Epiphanes in Daniel 11:40-45. Okay. I know this is a very, very popular view by a lot of, say, modern critical scholars. Again, I don't have necessarily a problem with modern critical scholars per se. I use their work in my work. I think their work is valuable. I think their work is important. But there is also sometimes a bias of skepticism that's basically thrown in. And a lot of the reason for the dating of 165 BC is based upon the whole idea of there can't be such a thing as prophecy. Therefore, all prophecy is actually that comes true is actually ex eventu prophecy, which just means it was written after the event, and then therefore Daniel is not written by the prophet Daniel. It is written by a forger of the 2nd century BC. Okay, so that's sort of the gist of what's going on here. I don't take that view. Now, I do think that prophecy in all periods of Hebrew history is something that gets recontextualized with every generation. And I think the prophecies that we find in Daniel are no different in that respect. It's basically prophecies that were contextualized in his time that then get later recontextualized in a later time. I don't see any problems with this as far as prophecies being divinely inspired or anything like that. But I also don't see likewise, because of this pattern of recontextualization that we find from prophetic literature, I don't also find it necessary to declare Daniel a forgery. It would seem very, very strange to me that Daniel would become, say, highly distributed as a canonical work. Like, for example, we find it in the Septuagint. Daniel does appear in the Septuagint. Well, most exegetes are going to say that, the Septuagint dates to at least, around 250 BC, so 3rd century. So, how do you have the Septuagint translating Daniel when it's supposed to be a forgery that comes 100 years later? Even guys like what's his name now? Kip Davis. Kip Davis admits that the Septuagint is 3rd century BC. He admits it's 3rd century BC. But he also, at the same time, too, believes that Daniel is a 2nd century forgery. I just don't see how the two views are very consistent. I don't see that. I also see the sort of the anachronisms, some of the anachronisms that are claimed to be found in Daniel can be explained by other means. So, I haven't really done anything on the Book of Daniel. I've looked into this issue just a little bit. There was a very, very good little book that was done. I think it was in the 1980s. It was an anthology on the Tyndale Seminar, and it was just simply, I think it was simply called the Book of Daniel. It had like Fairman in it, Donald Wiseman, even Ken Kitchen devoted an article to it. A very hard volume to get today. I'm very lucky to have a copy of it. But there are people who are looking at this issue again and are, coming up with their new ideas as to why it's written in certain ways. So, without looking into it any further, it's hard for me to say much more on this. So again, it's not a subject I've looked into that deeply, but I know that there are explanations for a lot of, say, the objections to Daniel, the historicity of Daniel as well. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. It's great to have you here tonight. Okay. Eddie Vasquez for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. A non-super chat question donation. Okay. Awesome. Thank you very much for your generosity. Let's pick Yoel's. All right. See if I can find it here. All right, and this is the one we're going to pick for it. Is Joan Esteban Celestiono. Thank you very much for the question, and thank you very much to Eddie Vasquez's generosity for basically supporting your question tonight. And Yoel asks, "Hey, Dr. Falk, is Kathleen Kenyon dating of the destruction layer accurate with stratigraphy, and is it disturbed by erosion or even slight leveling, or site leveling?" Okay. Kathleen Kenyon's dating of the destruction layer for City 4 is accurate. And these are the Middle Bronze fortifications. Okay. It uses ceramic typology. I think it's very accurate. She's dated it to 1550 BC. Okay. That, I think, is pretty much, nobody can test that at this point. Now, the other layer that was found by Garstein, the late Bronze Age layer, that one was mostly eaten away by site leveling. Okay, we do find erosion at Jericho, and it's pretty bad erosion, and most of it is actually wind erosion. It's actually not even water erosion, it's wind erosion. And wind erosion is actually a very, very severe environmental conservation issue at Jericho, because once they start excavating the site, the wind erosion just sort of tears apart the walls. So it is an issue. It's a big issue, and it's not the only place where wind erosion is a big issue anyway. Like, for example, it's a huge issue on the Giza Plateau, where you got like temples of funerary temples to like Menkaure that are just being chewed up by the wind. So wind erosion is a serious thing. Now, site leveling does not seem to have impacted the Middle Bronze fortifications. Okay, it seems to have affected the late Bronze 2B layer. So, when, for example, Lorenzo Nigro did his excavations at Jericho, he found a fragment of a mud brick wall there that dates to late bronze 1A. And there's no fire destruction of that wall at late bronze 1A. This only, and then again, above late bronze 1A, then you get very, very thorough site leveling. Okay? So that means that there probably was a late bronze 2B layer, and the destruction layer that Garstang found was probably part of that late bronze 2B layer. So I don't think that Kathleen Kenyon's excavation, I don't think that stratigraphy of the middle bronze layer was disturbed enough to invalidate the results. And much of the reason why it isn't invalidated is because we do find, say, a pretty good middle bronze ceramic topology there. So, so I think that's pretty thorough. Yeah, Kenyon's work was really solid. But it is also, I mean, if we are talking here about, you know, the middle bronze fortifications, you know, those are not ideal for, say, the whole Jericho narrative anyway. So I don't know why people try to salvage, basically try to shoehorn Kenyon's results into the biblical narrative here, because it's not a good fit. It never was a good fit. And it was a terrible fit, actually. So I doubt the accusation that that the stratigraphy of Jericho, at least during the Middle Bronze period, was highly intruded upon. I have great doubts towards that. Now, we do find sites where that does happen, where you have to be a little more careful with stratigraphy because of say, jumbling of layers. We find some of this happening, for example, at the very top layers at Avaris, where agricultural leveling has basically taken off, say, the very, very late 18th and into Dynasty 19 layers, and just sort of mixed them all together. So, anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much to Eddie Vasquez for sponsoring a question tonight. Very, very grateful to you for doing this, and it's wonderful that you're helping other people in the chat, you know, get their questions answered. Okay. Okay, Matthew Harrell for $1.99. Is Jacob's ladder Egyptian? Hard to say. We don't know, honestly. But conceivably, people in Canaan would have also had ladders. You know, we do find remnants of watchtowers in Canaan. And invariably, to get from floor to floor, there probably would have been ladders used. We find this as a normal part of, say, Semitic houses, where, say, Semitic houses were, say, 2 stories. Your typical Semitic house was 2 stories. You kept your livestock on the bottom floor and you slept on the top floor. So people would go to bed by going up and down a ladder. So, yeah, the ancient Israelites would have had a familiarity with ladders. So, yeah. So, I don't think here we have to necessarily say that Jacob's ladder was Egyptian. Could have been, but not necessarily. So anyway, I hope that answers the ladder question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, we got one final super chat here from the Camel Leopard, and then we'll take a couple of non-super chats, and then We're almost at 10 o'clock. We will get to call it a night. All right, the Camel Leopard for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Last one for tonight. Oh, promises. I'm working on a Bible study for Genesis 5. Do you think Seth was the biological son of Adam or just a progenitor from later in his clan? Thank you for all your work. Shabbat Shalom. Well, Shabbat Shalom to you too. My opinion is that Seth was essentially a progenitor. Essentially, I think he was a progenitor. But having come out of the clan of Adam, he would have been ascribed to that Adam was his father. Now, this plays into something that's very, very peculiar to, say, ancient Israelite culture. Okay? You know, we in Western culture, we have only one father. Our direct biological dad. Okay? Is usually termed as our father. Well, he's got a father too. You know, my dad had a father also. Well, you know, Grandpa is actually father to both my dad and to me. And the Israelites would have seen it that way. Like, for example, you know, somebody having, in ancient Israelite culture, somebody having, you know, 4 generations is, you know, might be great-great-grandchildren, but they're also seen as sons and daughters as well. So just because you're separated by a few generations does not break that relationship between parent and child. In the ancient Israelite mind, that relationship was maintained despite being separated by generations. So every individual had many fathers. Your biological father, your 2 grandparents, your 4 great-grandparents, you know, and so on. You know? And so an individual could have many fathers, and a father could have many sons. So this wasn't not at all uncommon in ancient Israelite culture. Okay? So there's not actually strong necessity here for Adam to be the biological father of Seth because he was already the progenitor and Seth was in the line of Adam. So the text would easily have regarded Adam to be the father of Seth, even if Adam was a progenitor and Seth was a progenitor. Okay? So I hope that answers the question. Thank you very much for the super chat and for your last question tonight. Very much appreciated, and it's been great having you here. Shabbat Shalom. Okay, I see RG Strategy put in a $5 super chat. Thank you very much for the super chat. Did you have a good May 4th, May the 4th be with you day? Yes, I did. Any new Egyptology news? Get better soon? Not off the top of my head. Oh, we do have actually one announcement. Yesterday was May 5th, which means our channel is now 2 years old. We've actually made it to our 2nd year now. So, we didn't have a big sort of send-up just because I'm been a little under the weather, but yeah, the channel is now 2 years old. So we are celebrating our 2nd birthday. We're in the terrible 2s. Time to create more trouble. Yeah, it just so happened that our very first video was published on May 5th, which happens to be Cinco de Mayo. So that's pretty easy to remember when this channel was first started, which happens to be on Cinco de Mayo. So Oh, thank you very much for the birthday cakes, Green Knight. That's awesome. I know you can't see the emojis up there, but yeah, we're actually jazzed that we've made it to 2 years, and it's been really really thrilling. It's been a wild ride, I'll tell you that. So, um, now that we've finished our super chats, and thank you very much for that super chat, RG Strategy. It was great to have you here joining us tonight. I'll take a couple of final questions, and then we will call it a night. Okay. Go back to the beginning here. I'm going to take Deanne Selzer's question here. Okay. And he asks, does nuclear war, say Putin, for example, entail that the end times would have to start during such a nuclear war? Not necessarily. Here's the thing. Nuclear war is absolutely devastating to cities. These are weapons that are designed to take out cities. But as such, though, the destruction that's caused by nuclear weapons is as much because of the shrapnel and debris that gets thrown around during a nuclear blast as it is from, say, the weapon itself. So you launch a nuke into, say, some farmer's field somewhere, and that's pretty much a waste. That's a waste of a nuclear weapon. These things are not cheap to make. Nuclear weapons are boutique weapons. They're expensive to make. They have a limited shelf life. They have to be constantly maintained. And they don't actually do as much damage as you think they do. And part of the reason is because the blast radius itself is not as big as most people would think. So even, say, when you get into, say, a blast in the, say, megatons, in the megatons, you're talking, I think, a 20-mile radius or something like that. You do that in a cornfield in the middle of Ohio, no one's going to care. It won't poison the ground forever. It's just going to burn up a bunch of corn. Okay? Maybe started one heck of a brush fire. But where nuclear war is really, really devastating is in cities. That's where it's really devastating. And that's because cities amplify the destructive effect. So one could, say, launch a tactical nuclear weapon. It might be a few kilotons. I think they make tactical nukes as small as 5 kilotons. They can even dial that down even smaller to, say, a few hundred tons of equivalent of TNT, just by dialing it. Some of these nuclear devices are adjustable. Like, for example, there's like the Trident missile has like 3 settings that go from very big to very small, depending on what the effect they want. They can pre-program it prior to launch, and it depends on when the fizzle event is when the detonators kick in, as to when that bomb explodes and by what degree it explodes. So, if a tactical nuke is done, like, for example, at the 5 kiloton range, which is less than half the payload at Hiroshima, it's unlikely on its own to, say, start an end time scenario. A lot more has to happen. before that end time scenario sort of kicks in. And nuclear weapons are not necessarily going to start it, and really not necessarily even going to finish it. Although we do have the capability of finishing it in that way. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. It's an interesting question, but you shouldn't read too much into this as far as end times eschatology goes. So anyway, thank you very much for the question, Deanne. Okay, let's take another non-super chat. I'm not going to even try to pronounce this name. I'm sorry. I'm not feeling that brave. Dr. Falk looking flyer than a rocket. Well, don't get used to it. Okay. Let's see, any more questions here? Good question. The Green Knight asks, where should a layman start if he wants to learn more about Akhenaten and Atenism? Okay.
I told him about your article.
Yep, I do have an article that's coming out in an Oxford publication. I don't know when, on Egypt and the Bible. I was asked to write the article on Akhenaten and Atenism. When that comes out, that's going to be a very important article, because it's very different than what you find in a lot of books and articles. I think a very good book on Akhenaten and his years was called The Amarna's Sunset by Aidan Dodson. It's a very, very good book. I think that book is probably the best book I've read right now on Akhenaten and Atenism. I know James Hoffmeyer wrote a book on Akhenaten as well. I don't agree with his views on Akhenaten and Atenism. It's a good book. It's a solid book. But he does sort of take the conventional view that Atenism is monotheism. I don't think it is. I honestly don't think it is. So I'd highly recommend Aidan Dodson's book, The Amarna's Sunset. So anyway, I hope that helps. Thank you for the question. Great question. Okay. It's Mayan, pronounced Waxaclahun Kawal. Okay. I tried. I'm sorry I butchered it, but I tried. I try to get people's names right, but you know that this one's really outside of my linguistic expertise here. So I do appreciate the question though. It was great, and so there's the recommendation. Okay. And I take a couple more non-super chats, and then we'll call it a night. Because I'm starting to get hungry. Yeah, I do these after I usually work Fridays, so I come home directly after work and I do these live streams. So I don't normally get a chance to eat prior to this. I just pretty much turn on the camera, do the setup, and start streaming. But it is the highlight of my week, and I wouldn't miss this for the world. So a couple more questions here. If I can find any, if there are any more. Jared Gilmore. Dr. Falk is terminating historical fallacies. Well, we'll see. We'll see. Oh. Dr. Kenny. Question. If a man asked you for your guitar, are you to give him the case too? Well, that would be very, very difficult because I don't have a case for my guitar. I never bought a case for my guitar. I never intended to go out with my guitar. So, I never actually bought a case for it. So, I had bought a stand for it, and it's basically been sitting beside me ever since. So, so if someone asked for my guitar, they wouldn't get a case because I don't have one. So, that answers that question. And I think I'll take one more, and then we will call it a night. Because we're just after 10 o'clock here. And it wouldn't do me well to stay up too late. I'll take this one, and this will be our final one for the night. From One Way. All right. And he asks, bless you, Dr. Falk. Are we able to identify which deity specifically the plagues are apparently polemicizing against? Thanks. Plagues are my favorite OT passages. Okay. Here is my view on the plagues. I do not think the plagues are polemicizing against Egyptian deities. This is a view that was popularized by Currid. And I think he's wrong. Once you start trying to match the plagues with specific deities of Egypt, the whole thing starts falling apart extremely fast. And I think part of the reason it falls apart as quickly as it does is the view tries to shoehorn what these gods represent into the plagues. And the gods of Egypt don't shoehorn like that. The other problem is a matter of biblical exegesis, which is that there is only one verse that suggests any connection at all between... Let's see if I can find it here. Okay. Only one verse in the Bible that suggests a connection. A hard connection, any sort of connection between the gods of Egypt and the plagues. And this is here. Exodus 12:12. For I will go to the land of Egypt on that night, and I will strike down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt. Well, I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. Okay, that's the only verse in the entire Bible that connects any of the plagues with judgment with the gods. Okay? But you'll notice one thing. This is specifically talking about one plague. And that's the last plague, the plague of the Passover, the 10th plague. None of the other plagues are ascribed to any sort of judgment of the gods of Egypt. Now, here's the thing. This is not even, and to be honest, this is not even specifically talking about, say, the deities of the Egyptian religious system. The gods of Egypt here are essentially those who have the power of life or death. We see earlier in the book of Exodus where it says, where Yahweh says to Moses, I will make you like a god to Pharaoh. The idea here is Yahweh is making Moses so that Pharaoh sees in Moses a man who has power over life and death. So that's what's being sort of intoned here. That's what's being inferred here. So I think what Currid has done here is he's read this passage and he says, "Oh, this one passage is again, this plague is against, the gods of Egypt. Therefore, all the plagues must be judgment against the gods of Egypt." He's overreading the passage. He's doing that fallacy of composition that we discussed in the popcorn review, the last popcorn review, where he takes something very, very specific and brings it out to the generalization. That whole fallacy of, Judy is a hard worker, therefore everyone in her company must be diligent at what they do. No, not necessarily. It's a logical fallacy. It's taking something very specific and overgeneralizing it. So I think that's what's going on here with Currid's view, is he's really basically taking something that's very specific and not even something that's referring to the divinities of Egypt, and then overreading it to include all the plagues of Egypt. Okay? So that's what I think about this passage, and that's what I think about this view, is that essentially you cannot identify specific deities to specific plagues, because the plagues are not about judgment of the deities. It's about the judgment of Pharaoh and his stubbornness to let the people go. So it's judgment on Pharaoh, judgment on the king, and broader, the people who support the king in his tyranny. So anyway, thank you very much for that question, and that's going to be the last non-super chat of the night. Now, I did see one more super chat come in the front, the midnight super chat. I have one last super chat here for $20 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And, if it's a last, 11:59 super chat, we're happy to get this too. We appreciate everyone who supports our channel financially, and you guys who do pay for the super chats do keep us going, keep us funded, and help us meet our bills. I can't thank you guys enough, because you're really helping us. You're helping us in amazing ways, and we just so appreciate it. So anyway, he says, "Hi, Dr. Falk. I didn't know one side effect of COVID was looking grat." Yeah, it doesn't happen to very many people, no. Any thoughts on getting a P.O. box for subscribers? I had thought about it. In fact, I thought about it just recently, in fact. But I'd have to weigh it, to be honest. There's things we do consider. We have been asked recently about doing a Discord server. You are the first person who's asked us for a PO box, but I have been giving that some thought over the last couple of weeks. So yeah, it is something that we are considering. We are considering this. Again, it's one of those things that I'm contemplating, and I have not made up my mind yet on. But if we do go ahead and do it, we will definitely make that PO box address public, so that people can send mail packages, bottles of whiskey. I don't smoke, by the way, but I do drink whiskey. I like my whiskey.
Yeah, we couldn't afford the Canadian tax.
No. But yeah, as I said, we've gotten into discussions again about the Discord server, and we have been looking at a possibility of a PO box too. So, ooh, Mr. Mr. Rich B.O.B. If Dr. Falk gets a public P.O. box, I'm sending him some Cajun and Creole spice mixes. Cajun and Creole are not the same thing. Oh, I believe it. Oh, I love spicy food. So, wow, that would be, wow. you know where to get me. Oh, I mean, I spent a lot of time living in the United States. I spent 20 years living in the United States, and I love American food. I love American food. I love Mexican food. I love chili. I love really spicy chili. No beans. I don't like beans in my chili. I'm a chili purist. And I do love Cajun food. One of the things I do make for myself on occasion is a Cajun pasta, and I just love it. Absolutely. It's beautiful, beautiful stuff. Absolutely. Nate on Yadon says, whiskey like a real man. Yep. Don't drink the Kool-Aid, but always drink the whiskey.
And Faye Abduan is from Wisconsin, so she's got.
Oh yes, beer and brats, beautiful stuff too. I love beer and brats as well. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful stuff. I only discovered brats when we lived in Wisconsin. We lived in Wisconsin for a few years, and just love the brats. Love the brats and beer. Now you're making me so hungry. I still got to make dinner. So, with that said, this is going to be the final comment of the night, and I want to thank everyone who decided to join us tonight for a very special Terminator Edition. I want to thank all our subscribers who view our videos faithfully and really keep YouTube interested in us by liking, disliking, adding comments. YouTube loves that interaction. So we're grateful to all our subscribers. I want to thank the people who have been our Patreon supporters who don't get nearly enough thanks. We've had a recent influx in Patreon support, which we're very, very grateful for. And again, I'm sorry for not getting thank you letters out sooner. We've just been snowed. So very much appreciate everything our Patreon supporters do for us, thanklessly, tirelessly, and without complaint. They've just been a real blessing to us. And I also want to thank everyone who donated to Super Chats tonight. We just love the Super Chats. As I say, they really do keep us in the black. And we very, very much appreciate it. And you guys support this channel and really, really help us make ends meet. So with that said, I want to thank everyone who is here in the live stream tonight, just participating. It's always great to have this live stream. It's a party, and we really enjoy it. So as that said, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible. I'll be back.